Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and today I'm joined by my brother, the Gritty Broman. How are you, Brent?
I'm well. Thank you.
We're a little tired, actually. Did a workout this morning. Brent's first day back in the gym in a while, huh?
When did COVID hit the U.S.? I was feeling crappy for a couple months, and then COVID gave me a great excuse to stop going to the gym.
Right. Well, we hit it today with our brother-in-law, Jeff Gibbers, and we hit it pretty hard. It was good. Got the swole on. Feels good. I've been hiking about 4 or 5 miles a day with a heavy pack up the mountain in the heat of the day. It's August 10th or something, 9th, 7th? 11th. Yeah. So that's the day we're recording this show. But this podcast will come out much, much later. But we're kind of pre-recording all these so we can just deliver them to you all kind of sequentially, so we have them pre-done. So we're working on them over the summer. This one, podcast number 2, on the River of Doubt. And we're talking about Theodore, and we're picking up where we left off. Now, where we left off last was pretty cool. It was basically Theodore Roosevelt getting shot in the chest by a bullet by an assassin, Shrank. And was he Bulgarian?
I believe he was
descent immigrant.
No, he was Bavarian.
Sorry to the Bulgarians. But he was shot. Then he gave a speech. We learned about him being a young man and being frail, and then making his body tough and getting through that. And we learned basically that he lost the presidency when he went for it for the third time.
He has this routine in life that when things really hit the fan, his coping mechanism is to go out to the woods.
Have an adventure.
And
expedition.
Things hit the fan. He was not expecting to lose the presidency. He's outwardly okay with it.
I would say he knew he was. It was a long shot, and we covered this in the earlier podcast, so I don't want to dive too much into it. You might want to go back and check it out if you haven't heard it. It's quite an entertaining little show, and it just sets the stage for what's about to happen. And as Brent was alluding to, Roosevelt lost. He went in as a private party because he turned against the Republicans, ran as an independent. He was the Bull Moose Party. He had Woodrow Wilson on the Democrat side, and you had William H. Taft on the Republican side. And the Republicans in power are angry because they're not in the White House anymore. They blame Roosevelt. Roosevelt's like, hey, you should have put me in. And he smoked Taft. So if he had been given the Republican nominee,
he'd have won.
He'd have won. He'd have been president again. They promised that if he had just waited till after Taft did a second term, that he could be
promises.
And I think when they didn't agree to it, he's like, all right, well, then I'll bring you all down. He came through on his threat. I think he genuinely tried to win. He went all out.
Yeah.
But it's tough when you split the Republican vote.
I think he wanted to win. He got shot and still delivered a speech. I think he wanted to win.
Yeah. And it actually wasn't too bad. He was pretty close. Definitely, had he not split the party, he would have crushed. Taft got nothing. 600,000 votes out of 15 million. I mean, nothing. Like, there's no wonder the American people didn't like him.
His wife didn't like him.
His wife didn't like him, yeah.
She was like, loser.
She's like, yeah, if you go up against Roosevelt, he's going to beat you.
Yeah.
So maybe you should just hand it over. But anyway, that's a different story. We're moving forward in the book, and we're going to talk about what happens next. Now,
he goes and rides a moose.
No. Maybe later.
He does. Have you seen that?
No.
He rides a moose across a river.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not real.
I've seen some pictures. No.
I was really stoked when I saw that, but it turns out, folks, he did not ride a moose. The internet's a lie.
What we're doing right now is we're jumping into the next section. And in this section, it kind of tells the story of how he ends up on this expedition in the Amazon jungle. And it gives you some context for the Amazon at this time in the world's history, meaning that nobody knew what the hell was down there. And it was a big
we still don't
mystery.
know what the hell's down there.
Amen. So there's a certain mystery. Every time I think of the Amazon, I think of this journey I read about of these kayakers who decided to float down the Amazon. I think it was the Amazon.
Did they have
Maybe it was the
terminal
Congo.
illnesses? Like what wouldn't
I swear it was the Amazon. Maybe it was the Congo. Yeah, it was one of. They both are in the same spot in my mind.
So they take up the same spot. Congo, Amazon.
Like, don't do it, right? So these 3 kayakers decide, they're world-renowned kayakers, they decide to float through. It must have been Africa, because the big concerns, I think, were hippopotamuses and Nile crocodiles. So that would be Africa. Hippopotami? Is that right? You're making it up, dude. Hippopotamuses. So these kayakers, they're going down the river, and this is gnarly river, and these guys are decked out, and they're trying to not die, and they're just shooting these rivers, and they're just crushing, right? And they're going fast. They tried to avoid being in the river at certain times of day to avoid dinosaurs, real live dinosaurs in the croc arena. Anyway, the story goes, they're going down the river. The best kayaker in the group, the legend, like the Michael Jordan of kayaking. You can tell I don't know a lot about kayaking.
Well, no one does.
He's going along, and some 25-foot croc just comes out and just, while they're booking, and just snatches him. Kayak and all, underwater, gone. Then the other 2 dudes are looking around. It's like, he's gone. Over. Just like that.
And they just exited the river. And
hey, young Jamie, how about you look it up?
Okay. 3 kayakers getting eaten by alligator. I'm going to type in Congo.
Not alligator, bro. Croc.
You were right. It is the Congo. Good job.
Yeah. What's it
2
say?
Americans and a South African traveled 1,000 miles of river this way through some of the densest concentration of man-killing wildlife in the world.
Is this Wikipedia? Or is this
No, this is some... This is from CBC News.
Okay.
This is the first time I've ever
Lay it
been
on
to
me.
this website. Oh my gosh. Coetzee.
Coates. He's the name of the guy that got snatched? Or is he the survivor?
That was the survivor. No, it was Coetzee. It was Hendrik Coetzee. Got munched on. The crocodile just pulled him right in the river. They were never able to find his body, well, because he got ate. And his kayak disappeared too. They never anything that was on the
right.
His entire person.
Read his statement that the witness gave.
I glanced over to measure that we were not paddling towards or away from each other, and just to my periphery, I saw the crocodile come out of the water, and he got onto Henry's left side, just the left shoulder, with his mouth. Talking to the villagers later, they figured the crocodile was at least 15 feet long and weighed up to 2 tons. Stooksbury and Korbelik watched the overturned boat shaking for about 20 seconds as the crocodile pulled Coetzee from the tight-fitting cockpit. Realizing they could do nothing, they paddled as fast as they could less than a mile downstream to a village where they did get his boat, where it floated by without even a scratch to tell him how he had disappeared. They saw how he disappeared. What do you mean? There's no mystery here. His body was never found, and he is presumed dead. Yeah,
Maybe he's still kicking around down there. Yeah. Not laughing at his death. It's a tragic story.
I'm laughing.
But you play dangerous games, you win dangerous prizes.
It's like saying, I'm going to go bike across Iraqistan. It's a bad move.
Right.
His goal was never to gain that notoriety. He was just really loving how he was living his life and the adventure it was taking him on.
Yeah, for sure. But you play stupid games, you'll win stupid prizes. So here we are.
People could say that, but I say go big or go home. Not that I'm condoning kayaking in the Congo.
I remember hiking this hill up in Evergreen, Colorado, when I was down there, and hiking up this road, and these dudes would take those paragliding things off the hill, and the dude was paragliding, and then he kind of caught a wind or whatever, and it just fell. And he and we were there, and he hit the ground, and I think he lived a week after that and then died. But I was like, look, it's not the smartest game to play.
Here's the deal. There's lots of cool things you can do that won't kill you.
Right.
Like, I'm all for doing some fun, crazy stuff, and heaven knows I should be dead 1,000 times over. I did not make great decisions growing up.
Yeah, myself, I take risks, but I don't know. Some just seem
Poorly calculated.
a little like more risky, you know?
Here, I might paddle across this river without a life jacket or something, just a random case I'm going to throw out. But I'm not going to go 1,000 miles down the Congo.
Yeah.
Okay, one is a couple hundred yards of danger.
Congo, Amazon, whatever. Anyway, the point...
The Congo's on.
The point was, here we are with an unknown territory in South America, hardly explored at all. And one thing leads to another, and you see how this expedition unfolds. And you can see, this is for all of us to learn from, how some poor decisions in leadership are made. Because you're having people in charge of the expedition and certain parts of it, like gear, routes.
Putting Uncle Bill in charge of the food.
Exactly.
You guys want to eat Kit Kats and Kipper Snacks for 2 weeks? I gotcha.
Brent's reminiscing some of our past hunts with our uncle. Absolutely. Like, there's certain people cannot be in charge of certain things or you're screwed.
You're going to wear jeans in the snow for 3 weeks.
And this is kind of how this happens, right? Mm-hmm. And this is what makes the whole story remarkable, too. By the time he does what professionals can't pull off. Mm-hmm. So you'll find toward the end of this story that there are other expeditions that try to repeat the same journey and are never heard from again. And they had all the information. They had all the right gear. They had all the right this and that.
People who could speak the language.
The whole deal. So we're going to get right into this. Before we do, please help us out using our coupon codes in the description fields of the videos. Like our codes for Mountain Ops, Seek Outside, Valkyrie Archery, we got Alpaca Rafts, we got Tree Line Pursuits, E-Scouting. I know we're missing some. Check them out. We got Sissy Sticks, Trekking Poles.
Bow season's coming up. If you're going deep, maybe check out some Heather's Choice.
Yeah, Backcountry Meals. So check all that out. And every time you purchase from one of our partners, that helps us keep our show going. So we really appreciate that. All right, Brent, here we go. So here it goes. In February 1913, this is the date we're dealing with here. 3 months. Yeah, 3 months after Roosevelt's election defeat, the postman delivered some first-class mail to Sagamore Hill on a horse-drawn wagon, and he arrived with a letter from Argentina. Wah-ha-ha-ha. It's ominous.
Do you know what Sagamore Hill is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to tell the audience?
Yeah. Sagamore Hill was the name of Theodore's summer house.
Yeah. It's a little pretentious, don't you think? Sagamore Hill. Like you named your house.
Uh-huh.
It's like the house in Evergreen. No. It's like...
Brian, it's not a big deal. He just has a small summer camp that he goes out to every once in a while.
Right.
He's got 2 homes and a small summer camp.
Yeah. All right. The formal 3-page letter was carefully typed in English on the stationery of the Museo Social in Buenos Aires. It was merely one of many invitations from around the globe that arrived regularly for the ex-president. So people are always hitting up the ex-president to do things. Turns out that this group is about 2 years old, and they're funded by a group of forward-thinking businessmen and political figures. And the institution is devoted to intellectual agenda that most appealed to the former American leader. So basically, these guys put together, they want to put on lectures and stuff it's like TED Talks. Okay? And they want Roosevelt to come and be a lecturer. Now, it was only 2 years old, but it was kind of growing in some momentum here. And it was out of Argentina. And they basically came together and they were trying to talk Theodore Roosevelt into doing it. He usually dismisses all this stuff, but he just lost the election. He's a little bummed out. And he gets this letter. And he's thinking, South America? Yeah, right now America kind of isn't my jam right now. I need an epic adventure.
The North Side kind of sucks right now.
Also, they offered him $250,000 in today's dollars to come and do the lecture. So there's a little financial incentive, plus all costs are paid for, right?
He can get himself a second summer camp.
So you get to go on a little vacation. And it says in the book, at this time that although Roosevelt had inherited a substantial fortune from his father and the Roosevelt name, that had enabled him to go into politics without worrying about supporting his family much. But after his long and successful political career, he didn't have a big fortune to leave behind to his family. And so they were kind of set for life, but a little extra cash to start investing somewhere.
You mean he doesn't have a stipend for life and people protecting him for
no
the rest
trust
of his life?
fund stuff. There is this finite amount of money, although it was substantial. He's done well with it, but so he has a good name, like a legendary name and popularity. But anyone who's been popular without money realizes it doesn't do you a lot of good if you can't turn it into money.
Monetization is the hardest part of everything.
Monetization is difficult. Like you can be adored athlete, but if you can't get paid by a team, right, or some kind of, monetizing your fame is a little, or renown is a little easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah.
Some people are really good at it. Some are not. Very creative people tend to not be very good at turning their creative ideas and content into dollars. Because running a business is a lot different than being than being, than painting or being a photographer. So I've been around a lot of photographers that are the best, but can't seem to make money. So anyway, he decides he's thinking about it. And down in the area, his son Kermit is there. Okay. Now Kermit is, I think he's 18 or something. He's 18 years old.
That's it? I thought he was a little older.
He is a little older. I'll just read to you. Basically, his son Kermit is in South America now, and I'll kind of get into that. So he's thinking, well, I can get paid to be a lecturer, and I can visit my son Kermit in South America, who he's really proud of and really, really, is close to. And he's getting older, and he's like, it's time for an adventure and to unplug. Now, he didn't have great, grand intentions of going on any expedition. That sort of sneaks up on him, and we'll get into that here in a minute. Beyond the money, the recognition, and the opportunity to advise a fledgling democracy in Argentina, Roosevelt also had a very personal reason for wanting to take this trip. It would give him a chance to see his 23-year-old son. So he's 23. His name is Kermit, who had been living and working in South America for more than a year. Kermit was a quiet middle child, the third of Roosevelt's 6 children, number 3 of 6. He was smart, disciplined, and a skilled athlete, and he had inherited his father's passion for far-flung places and physically challenging adventures. Kermit's first great adventure had been a gift from his father, a chance to join him on his post-presidency African safari in 1909. Kermit was only 18 years old at the time and had just begun Harvard as a freshman. Roosevelt had hesitated to take his son on a trip that he himself had waited a lifetime for, but in the end, he put his faith in Kermit's serious demeanor and rigorous discipline, and he concluded that he would not risk spoiling the young man. He says to his son, "You blessed fellow, I do not think you will have to wait until your ship comes in before making that trip to Africa." Roosevelt wrote Kermit from the White House that spring. "The only question that gives me concern in connection with it is whether letting you take it will tend to unsettle you for your work afterwards. I should want you to make up your mind fully and deliberately that you would treat it just as you would a college course. Enjoy it to the full, count it as so much to the good. And then, when it was over, turn in and buckle down to hard work. For without the hard work, you certainly cannot make a success of life." So he's concerned about spoiling his son, taking someone that young on a trip that Theodore Roosevelt has wanted to do his whole life. He's concerned that he's admonishing his son to be a hard worker, because without hard work, you can't be successful. Work equals success. It says that Kermit justified his father's trust in him by returning to his studies as soon as the expedition ended and completing his 4 years at Harvard in 2.5. Kermit adores his father, and you'll find out as we go through the story more and more that he really adores his father. He's introverted and a little opposite of Theodore in that regard. And yet he has the same kind of drives and passions. He also has the tendency for depression, just like Theodore does. So there's a lot of things that they relate to in one another. And it goes on to say, as soon as Kermit graduated in the summer of 1912, he dived headlong into another adventure in a new country on a new continent entirely on his own. His first job in South America had been with a Brazil railway company, but after some shakeups in the management, he had taken a job building bridges for the Anglo-Brazilian Iron Company. Although he suffered from what Roosevelt referred to as intermittent fever, he was thriving in this rough, unfamiliar environment and was making his father proud. I am greatly pleased at the way that Kermit has gone on, Roosevelt had written to his sister-in-law, Emily. He appears to be making good down in Brazil. Kermit going to Brazil kind of impressed his father. And there's probably some two-way street going here. You know, Kermit likes these adventures. He likes to strike out on his own. But he goes to Brazil all on his own. And it did impress his dad. And he did want to please his dad. He adores his father. He worships the ground his father walks on. And it says, not only had the young man struck out on his own, but he had chosen South America, a continent that in the early part of the 20th century was still considered remote, mysterious, and dangerous, because it was. In fact, at that time, less was known about the interior of South America than about any other inhabited continent.
I don't know if that's really changed much. Right. We've got some vague state and country lines for that, but that place is not explored well.
Yeah, there's some people down there that have still never seen, or I think they've all been fairly discovered now. But there's a possibility that there's groups that are there because you can't see through the jungle.
As I was going to say, you have to either travel the rivers or you have to hoof it.
But even if you fly over it, you can't see anything in it. But they do have the new seismic stuff. Now they've been able to find civilizations
buried underground,
basically by doing some kind of, I don't know, fancy
ground radar,
and then they're able to find all these cities in South America that are thousands and thousands of years old, and they're able to see a whole network. Because it's funny, because if you look at the Middle East and some other areas that have been dry climates forever, you look at Egypt, you're able to see all of the
everything forever.
Yeah, from civilization's earliest times. But when you go to South America, it's easy to come to South America and think, oh, it's real primitive. They never did evolve. They never had civilizations over here like you had in Egypt. But now it's clear that that's not true. There were people here as advanced as Egyptians were advanced in that part of the world. And so you had different civilizations come and go, but they're just so easily destroyed and disappear in these wet climates versus in drier climates. It's funny, when I was a kid, our grandpa brought home a early model Ford truck, early, like one of the very first one, 1940s, 30s, something like that. It was a really cool truck. It'd been in Arizona since they were kids or something. They were like, oh, we're going to restore this truck. And it was fairly intact. So they put it on a flatbed trailer and they brought it to Oregon. And they set it outside in Oregon. And within 3 years, it was just rusted through and gone. Like Oregon ate it alive.
Story of my life.
And yet in Arizona, it had survived in the desert for, 70 years or something. That's the difference, right? Like things disappear in jungles. So here he is. There you have the idea. You have this thing with his son and how South America is very
hospitable.
There's that, but unknown. The interior of the Amazon is completely unknown. And so remote and unknown was the Amazon that the first substantial effort to penetrate it had ended in failure only the year before, when the final wooden ties were laid on the Madeira-Mamoré Railroad. The railroad, which ran little more than 200 miles along the Madeira and Mamoré rivers in western Brazil, had been designed to carry the highly prized sap of the rubber tree from the depths of the Amazon to the coast, where it could be shipped to overseas markets. Any promise that the railroad held, however, was eclipsed by the horrors of building it. In The Sea and the Jungle, his classic 1912 book on the Amazon, British author H.M. Tomlinson described meeting some of the men who worked on the railroad. Quote, they were bearded like Crusoe, pallid as anemic women, and speckled with insect bites. These men said that where they had been working, the sun never shone, for his light was stopped on the unbroken green, which, except where the big rivers flowed, roofed the whole land. So they describe it going on, and it was a mess. And the South American rubber trade had gone bust. They couldn't even finish the railroad. The jungle just killed them. 6,000 men died of disease and starvation trying to build the railroad.
Jeez.
For nothing. Okay. So there you have it. The railroad through the jungle was a fruitless effort.
It sounded like a terrible idea.
Going back to the book, for Roosevelt, South America's vast, largely unknown and unexplored interior was perhaps the most important factor of all in shaping his decision to accept the invitation. Okay. So he decides, hey, I want to check it out. But at the same time, he's like, this is just a visit. What I'm going to do is go down there, hang out with Kermit, check out some of the sites, do my lectures, get paid, and maybe go on a week-long exploration here and there and see some stuff. The book goes on to say that before Roosevelt was a Rough Rider or president, he was always a naturalist. And we talked about it, and the book goes into some detail on how he had his, his Roosevelt Museum of Natural History when he was a kid. We covered it in an earlier podcast. And it turned out, here he is, the ex-president of the United States, the ex-Rough Rider, and so on. And it says, the book goes on to explain how he was good buddies with everyone at the Museum of Natural History. And he reaches out to one of the guys at the museum to tell him that, hey, look, I'm going on this trip to South America. Is there anything you want me to grab? Basically. And he talks to the museum. The museum's excited about it, and they're like, you know what, we could pay for some of this, and if you would go off and do a few extra things. He's always been really good. When he came back from Africa, it says he had come back from Africa 4 years earlier in 1909, and his collecting trip through Africa had been a huge boon to the Museum of Natural History and the Smithsonian Institution, indeed the scientific world. In fact, according to the then president of the Museum of Natural History, Henry Fairfield Osborn, it had been by far the most successful expedition that has ever penetrated Africa. So he came back with a lot of artifacts and things for the museum from his trip to Africa. So not only did Theodore Roosevelt go to Africa to hunt, but he's always collecting. Mm-hmm. He's always thinking of natural history. He's always a naturalist. And every time he travels, that's part of how he nerds out on the travel. It's kind of like people who go to Hawaii, but then bring their bow and bow hunt while their wife is at the beach.
Or people that go to Europe and then go do like genealogy in cemeteries.
Right. Or people who go to Europe and then they bird watch instead of like look at the rest of Europe.
Mm-hmm. All the cool structures, the Colosseums,
Yeah. They're out there bird watching. So like that, he has that passion for the naturalist stuff. So wherever he goes in the world, that's his hobby on the side he's going to dive into. So that's what he does. Going back to the book, foremost among Roosevelt's friends at the museum was Henry Fairfield Osborn, the articulate young paleontologist who 5 years earlier had become the first scientist to be named president of the museum, a position he would hold for 25 years. Roosevelt had known Fair Osborn most of his life. Osborn, who would earn a place in history for naming the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
That's why I was like, man, that sounds so familiar.
Did not have the specialized regional knowledge necessary to help the former president with his plan, but he pledged the full support of the museum's staff and offered the assistance of Frank Chapman, head of the museum's ornithology department, whom Roosevelt knew and respected from his own detailed study of birds. So Chapman wrote a bunch of books on birds and all this stuff, which we covered earlier.
Nerded out on birds.
Yeah, nerded out on birds. So he's like, the president of the museum hooks him up with Chapman, and he and Chapman start hanging out and talking about his trip and what could we do. Well, he's getting ready to have lunch with Roosevelt one afternoon to talk about the trip, and it's like, it's pretty casual. Well, this Father Zahm shows up, okay?
Father Zahm.
Father John Augustine Zahm from the University of Notre Dame. And he's a priest, dude, Catholic, and he has been to South America and loves it a few times. And he's been trying to talk Theodore Roosevelt to going back to South America with him and just like traveling for like 5 or 6 years, 10 years. And he almost had him convinced to go to South America, but he chose Africa instead, and Theodore went to Africa. So he ends up coming to the luncheon. He sits down with Chapman from the museum, Father Zahm, the Catholic, who's an old friend of Theodore. And they sit down, and Zahm is like, dude, I'm telling you, you got to go to South America and do some exploring.
Bro, listen, you got to check this out.
This is crazy, right? So they have this whole lunch thing, and Roosevelt's kind of like, sure, why not? A little adventure, sure.
Why not?
But he's not really, none of them are like even the tiniest bit aware of what they're thinking about doing. Like they're not. You can, as it unfolds, it's like they're so like, oh yeah, we're just going to traipse along the jungle, climb some mountains and explore them. No, this is a man-eating, like, this is the Congo in South America. It's not a good idea. Anyway, they basically start throwing out ideas. One thing leads to another, and the next thing you know, they're planning this trip. And it's like, yeah, it's like three dudes getting together, going, hey, dude, yeah, let's go check out, I don't know, the edges of the mountains of Afghanistan and look for some rare sheep or whatever. It's probably not a good idea.
No, it's never a good idea to go Iraq.
They've got it all kind of planned out. It's all in their mind. And they start doing this plan. Okay. Roosevelt's only concern was, I'm not that in shape as I have been in the past. So as long as the expedition isn't too physically demanding, not that I'm not tough enough to handle it, he says. I mean, I did get shot, he says, and in a letter, and I pretty much gave the speech. And, I'm no stranger to adversity, but I am not in the kind of shape I would be to really do a major kick-ass adventure. So just keep it light.
Adventure light.
He says, I don't in the least mind risk to my life, but I want to be sure that I am not doing something for which I will find my physical strength unequal.
Smart.
Yeah. So one thing leads to the next, and Roosevelt, he's mildly interested in the trip. He's not really thinking about it too much. He's busy doing other things. And this Father Zahm character is kind of like leading the group. He's been there before. He's been thinking about this for like 7 years, where he wants to go, which rivers he wants to explore, all this stuff, right? This is a daydreaming like explorer. This isn't an experienced dude, right? He's just a guy who wants to go and experience the natural
Father
wonders.
Zahm is a fanatic? Weird. I never would have guessed.
No, he's just, it says right here, Theodore Roosevelt left all the planning almost entirely to Father Zahm, who he affectionately, though condescendingly, referred to as a funny little Catholic priest.
It's like Theodore's that big.
So, and Theodore's thrown out like, well, I want to visit Cuzco and, maybe this place, maybe that place. But he just kind of leaves it up to him. Okay. So this is what happens next. Father Zahm, he's no expert. So what's he do? He's like, who can I get to do all the planning for us? Mm-hmm. So Theodore passes it to Zahm, and then Zahm passes it to someone else.
See, there's a problem when your outsourcer outsources. That's when quality control really goes down the toilet.
And it's so let me get into this. So having at least realized his longstanding ambition to return to South America is underway, Father Zahm was now faced with the job of turning his dream into a reality. Looking for assistance, he headed to the sporting goods section of Rogers and Pete and Company, the New York City department store, and fell into a conversation with the head of sporting goods clerk, a man named Anthony Fiala.
Was Anthony trying to make a sale?
So this dude at the department store and him start talking, okay? Well, I mean, so not experts, right? Mm-hmm. On the strength of Fiala's evident interest in exploration, Father Zahm wasted no time in inviting him to join the party. Quickly delegating all the logistics and burdens of the trip by placing his new friend in charge of selecting and ordering the expedition's provisions and equipment. After all, he's a store clerk, so. Mm-hmm. But he's been on some adventures, Brent. Listen to this. As convenient as it may have been to Zahm, however, the selection of Fiala as the expedition's quartermaster was less than auspicious for the expedition as a whole. For while the 44-year-old clerk did indeed have a background in exploration, the details of that experience arguably made him the last person on Earth to be entrusted with the planning or provisioning of a scientific expedition. Despite his current job as a department store clerk, nearly every explorer at the turn of the 20th century knew who Anthony Fiala was.
Why?
Indeed, his story was a cautionary tale of what can happen when an expedition goes terribly wrong and its commander survives to face derision from his peers and exclusion from his profession. Here he is. You might, for something like this, do a job interview. Be like, oh, what's your past experience, and did you almost kill everyone on your expedition? Like, how did it go? Right. But they're just like, let's plan a trip, a picnic in the park. This is kind of how this is going, right? And, oh, you're cool. You know a lot of things. You want to come? Yeah, I've been exploring before. And they talk to each other. They're all showing a tremendous lack of experience and knowledge about a trip they're planning, and they're all jumping in. 10 years earlier, this Fiala guy, tall and thin, with a prominent nose and a small angular face, so he'd be 34, had been in a high-stakes race with an elite group of men for one of history's greatest geographical prizes, the North Pole. Fiala's first trip to the Arctic had been as the photographer for the Baldwin-Ziegler expedition in 1901. When that mission failed to reach the pole, its leader, Evelyn Baldwin, was fired, and Fiala was promoted from photographer to commander of a second expedition in 1903. The renamed Fiala-Ziegler expedition never made it farther north than 82 degrees. Its ship, crushed in the Arctic ice, sank, and Fiala and his men, out of the reach of rescue ships, were stranded in the icy north for 2 excruciating years. Many of you may have read this story. I've read it. I've actually read this story. It's this whole separate book.
And they went full Donner Party, right? Like they ate each other, right? There's not enough penguin.
Okay. So on Fiala's orders, the expedition's provisions were bundled together for safekeeping on the ice, which gave way one night as Fiala and his 38 men slept.
I'd eat him first.
They awakened in horror to find half of their food supply and all of their coal lost. Only the discovery of supplies from another expedition kept the entire party from perishing. So they found another ship on the ice, which saved their lives. Back in New York, Fiala had to face his fellow explorers' brutal assessment of his leadership skills. They wasted no time on sympathy. On hearing details about the expedition, the renowned British naturalist and explorer Henry Fielden excoriated it as an ill-conceived, badly managed, undisciplined venture, and its commander as utterly incompetent. Writing about Fiala, he wrote, "Maybe a fairly good cook, but not a leader of men." It was clear that no one would be sending Anthony Fiala on another expedition anytime soon. When Father Zahm happened into Rogers Pete, the department store, a decade later, looking for supplies for his trip with Roosevelt, his story of an impending journey into the Amazonian jungle tapped a wellspring of hope in Fiala. "I would give anything in the world to go with you," he told Zahm. Had Roosevelt been concerned about the trip he was about to take, he certainly would have hesitated to hire a man whose sole exploring experience had been in the Arctic, a region that had almost nothing in common with the Amazon, and who, while there, had led his men to a disaster of legendary proportions. But given Zahm's enthusiasm about Fiala, Roosevelt's like, almost in passing, he agreed to hire him, not merely as an extra hand, but as the man in charge of equipping the entire expedition. Outsourcing upon outsourcing to people who have no idea about the area you're headed. There are people that are very good at logistics and planning. Mm-hmm. You need them on your side if you're not good at that, if that's not your thing.
My wife, if we go on a long trip, she cannot pack the food. Like, she doesn't have the experience doing that.
Right.
And again, I'll end up eating Kit Kats and Kipper snacks the entire time. Like,
that's why I think like the e-scouting class that Mark Livis ate, that puts people on a road to understanding terrain and country and maps and software and all of that. I did podcasts years ago with Aaron on compasses and how to look at a paper map and use and read UTM grids. That's a solid group of content there. It was eye-opening to me at the time on how to use a map, paper map, and UTM grids, and how to plot your course and how to use a compass. And I still listen to those podcasts every now and then just to brush up on my compass and map reading. But what we have today in terms of tools with GPS and your iPhone and what it can do, it's amazing. And I always have a backup digital map as well as a paper map, as well as a compass. And you just kind of learn those skills. That takes you a long, long way in having backup plans, knowing where your water is, having different areas to hunt.
If you've studied your hunting area, it's super hard to get lost.
It starts to become
super hard.
Well, it depends on the terrain. Like when you're hunting in coastal regions of Oregon,
it's not going to help you much.
It just looks like green trees. You have to rely on the topo, but it's hard to recognize features because you can't see anything. Other terrain is quite easy. Like when you're navigating areas like Colorado, Wyoming, parts of Montana, it's like so much easier. If you grew up on the Oregon coast, it's a different ball game. And
you're basically walking through the forest hoping someone's going to step in front of you.
Well, that's where the Amazon jungle comes into play. It's a nightmare. You got some rivers, and otherwise you don't have a lot of terrain features to work with. But I think that those maps are critical in teaching you, and then, of course, you can always watch film of other people doing similar hunts. Like if I'm going, our friends over at Weatherby, they just got back from this kick-ass caribou hunt that they went on. And, we know the time of year they went, now we're talking to them, Ryan and I, about what clothing, what gear, how they navigated the space, how they did the hunt. We have those resources now. Doing all of that research, making sure you're equipped and ready, doing graduated adventures. Like Roosevelt's quite adept at surviving in the outdoors, right? This isn't his first rodeo. He's done a lot of explorations and gone all over the West. But going to South America is a different animal altogether. They really are walking into a nightmare scenario and they don't know it. Well, Mr. Zahm, the funny little Catholic priest, Father Zahm, he was pretty excited. With Fiala now in the picture, the priest could simply delegate and pontificate, both of which he happily did. He said, "A better man could hardly have been found for our purposes," he told Theodore. Thenceforth, he writes, "I had little more to do with the outfitting of the expedition than to tell Fiala what my experiences in the tropics had taught me." And Fiala had only gone to visit, Father Zahm had only gone down there a couple of times. That's why he wants to go back. They just don't have much knowledge. So they go down there, and I'm going to read this. The expedition's tentative plan was to start in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and then travel by boat northward up the length of the continent along well-known navigable rivers to the Amazon, giving Roosevelt a chance to observe a wide range of landscapes and animal life in relative comfort. After reaching the Amazon River, Roosevelt was considering traveling up the Rio Negro, whose black waters famously mix with the cafe au latte colored Amazon at the junction of the two great rivers in north-central Brazil. Then down the broad Orinoco River, crossing Venezuela and the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so they have this kind of whole plan. They didn't expect it to be particularly taxing or dangerous, and it was pretty much well-charted rivers that they thought could give them the adventure they wanted without a lot of risk. Mm-hmm. So, Brent, how do they end up on the River of Doubt? What's your guess?
My guess is 2 people are going to get 8.
Yeah, but how do they go from this plan to the one they end up with? Because this plan's not a bad one. Mm-hmm. And if you're thinking of the trip in terms of this plan, it's like, okay, these rivers have been floated before. We know this route. It takes us here. You can pretty much float the whole thing. Maps tell you where there's waterfalls and other things. So we can.
Well, either Theodore's going to say, no, I want to go this way, or someone's going to take a left turn when they should have gone right.
Well, we'll see. One of the earliest disagreements of the fledgling expedition was a dispute over the selection of boats to carry them. Despite the central role of river travel in the planned route, the specific requirements of that travel were largely a matter of mystery to these guys. Apart from Father Zahm, whose time in South America had been primarily sightseeing, they didn't know what the hell to expect. Despite, or perhaps because of, so basically they argued about which boats to get because none of them had an idea of what to expect. So they start arguing about what would be the right boat. Fiala was looking forward to using the expedition to test a pet theory he had developed about canoes, and took the initiative to order 2 craft similar to those traditionally built by the native peoples of North America.
Like a long canoe?
He was convinced that the lightweight northern canoes were much better suited for the Amazonian tributaries than the inflexible heavy dugouts that they would find in South America. So picture Last of the Mohicans, a
long canoe.
A hide-covered canoe that you're floating the Great Lakes in.
I like more surface area. It's harder to flip.
The canoes he ordered were 19 feet long, built with a cedar frame and covered in canvas.
Jeez.
So paper. Where the rivers were navigable, each one would carry a ton of cargo and 3 to 4 men. Even better, they weighed only 160 pounds each, Brent.
Oh.
So 4 men, 2 if necessary, could pick them up and easily haul them for miles if the rivers became impassable. Sounds great.
Yeah, for miles. Yeah.
Sounds great. It sounds great until you see one of these rivers, which is basically a Class 5 rapid with boulders on it all around every bend. Then that's not the best design. But we don't know if that's the case yet. Let's get into the book a little further. It says, Frank Harper, Roosevelt's British-born private secretary, concerned about Roosevelt's safety, but otherwise lacking a clear professional basis for his opinion, favored instead a variety of stamped steel boats manufactured by W.H. Mullins Company of Salem, Ohio.
Steel boats.
Okay, steel boats. Now, in payment for a matching pair of 800-pound steel, so they're 800 pounds, bro. They're 800 pounds. Characteristically, Zahm also managed to prevail upon the company to make some improvements to the boats at the company's own expense for the glory of it, he said. He also ordered 2 custom pennants to announce the expedition with appropriate pomp and ceremony. So they were mounted to the boat. R for Roosevelt and Z for Zahm. I mean, why not float in style?
Zahm.
Just the name Zahm creeps me out.
It sounds like a cult leader.
I know.
Father Zahm.
It's something I picture in like.
It sounds like a guy who's going to hand you some Kool-Aid.
It reminds me of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Like I'm picturing Temple of Doom, Zahm, the guy that rips in and yanks the heart out of the beating chest, still beating heart. While the chaos and costs surrounding the expedition's boats grew, Fiala set about providing for the rest of their needs, procuring the food and provisions the men would require as he understood them. The quantity and variety were impressive, but the question of what items to include was something else entirely. Nearly as much thought seemed to have been put into the purchase of luxuries and incidentals as necessities. Fiala ordered pancake mix, sliced bacon, boned chicken, dehydrated potatoes, safety matches, soap. He stocked up on smoking pipes, 3 dozen, 2 kinds of tobacco, malted milk, and 24 rolls of Challenge toilet paper. One heavy...
Wait, 24?
Yeah.
How long are they going for?
One heavy zinc-lined case included nothing but spices and gourmet condiments, tins of ground mustard, celery salt, poultry, seasoning, paprika, cinnamon, nut... Holy dang. Chutney, orange and grapefruit marmalade. I skipped a whole bunch. Tabasco sauce and olive zest. Ever mindful that the expedition would be led by a former president, Fiala even sent Roosevelt a variety of teas so that he could select his favorite kind. This was just a romp in the woods right here. This is just going to be a fun little trip.
Sounds like they're going glamping.
I am sending you 5 samples of tea, he wrote in September, and I would appreciate it very much if you would test them and let them know which varieties you like for your jungle trip.
The jungle trip. We're going on a jungle trip, Daddy.
Jumping ahead, the museum freaks out because they're like, you could die. And we don't like that. If we're going to pay for the trip and it's going to be on our dime, we want to know a little more about this because we're a little worried that this thing's getting out of hand. And Roosevelt's like, dude, it's cool.
You mean they heard the guy's name was Zahm? And they're like, hold up.
Yeah. He's like, I've lived a long life. If I die, whatever. And the museum's like, yeah. It's... Do you realize how many Americans will hate us if you die? No, you're too popular, too famous. We don't want to be the name on the expedition of your death. And so they go through this back and forth. And it says, the museum, however, could not afford to take chances. So Chapman was determined to find a naturalist who was not only talented and experienced, but could be counted on to ensure that Roosevelt returned from the Amazon alive. So they're trying to find some sort of guide, naturalist to go with that is also like a mountain dude or, that can keep him alive while they're out there. They go through a few and they pick this guy named George Cherry. I'm going to call him Cherry.
Is he French?
No. But, I mean, maybe, obviously, his name is of French origin, I'm fairly certain. But he's an American dude. He's 48 years old, and they get him on the trip. And he turns out to be a pretty killer dude. And it says George Cherry had spent the past quarter century, more than half of his life, collecting birds in South America. So this dude knows South America, right? Although he had the lean, carved muscles of a jaguar and skin that looked as if it had been soaked in tannin and left to dry in the sun, Cherry also had the refined features of a venerated statesman. His hair was closely clipped and graying, and he had a handsome face, a modest mustache, and a calm, dignified expression. So this Cherry dude is joining the expedition, and he's quite experienced in collecting birds in Colombia and other South American countries. It says that he speaks Spanish like a native, is accustomed to roughing it, and is, besides, a capital traveling companion. Okay, so the museum finds this Cherry guy, and he's coming along, George Cherry. Cherry received the letter, and it says, he decides to go.
I wouldn't want to be have that guy's job either.
He says, having just returned from my 25th trip to that country, he later observed dryly, my enthusiasm did not break bounds. Besides his reluctance to leave his family and his farm, which had been obliged to struggle on without him for far too long and too often, Cherry had little interest in tagging along with an official entourage or spending time, as he put it, camping with royalty.
Ooh.
So he's kind of like, I'd say like sort of your Lampers. Your Ryan Lampers, mountain man type who, spent a lot of time in this area, 25 expeditions he's gone on down there. He just got back. He was not excited about this. Hey, we need you to go on this trip invitation. He was thinking, okay, it's going to be glamping. That is not what I want to do. It's either hardcore with hardcore dudes or I would rather not. But despite his misgivings, Cherry agrees to take the trip to New York for 10 more days to learn more about it. I mean, just to entertain the idea. Once he was at the museum, Chapman was able to remind him of the excitement of their recent adventures and the possibility of collecting specimens that were new to science. So Chapman offers him a lot of money and talks him into it. By the end of the visit, Cherry had agreed to repack his luggage and go on the trip. As extra insurance, the museum dude Chapman also recruited another museum scientist, Leo Miller, who at 26 was already highly regarded by his colleagues, and he got recruited to go as well. Miller, who was already in South America collecting both birds and mammals for the museum, would be the designated mammologist on the Roosevelt expedition, leaving the birds to Cherry. Okay, so they're there to collect specimens, and so Cherry's going to get birds, and this dude, Leo Miller, is going to get mammals. This division of labor, Chapman reported to Osborne, would have the effect of practically doubling the efficiency of the collecting force. So the museum's fairly involved here. With the addition of Cherry and Miller to the expeditionary team, Osborne relaxed. Osborne is the museum guy.
The guy who named the T-Rex.
Yep. And he felt more secure in the knowledge that Roosevelt would come home alive. Although the museum president would later insist that his friend had prepared with the utmost intelligence and thoroughness for what he knew would be a hazardous trip, the truth was that at this point, Roosevelt viewed the expedition as neither hazardous nor deserving of much time or thought. Osborne, however, had two reasons to feel confident. He had hired tough, experienced naturalists to accompany Roosevelt. Even more important, the expedition's intended route, although strenuous, was relatively well known and not particularly dangerous. There was no cause for concern, so long as Roosevelt's plans did not change. And that is the end of this podcast.
Really?
People don't plan on almost dying or dying.
Mm-hmm.
They don't plan on getting shot by poisoned arrows and so forth or dying from... These are not... Usually it's because you didn't plan that you end up there. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And here we are. You can see this unfolding. Roosevelt's kind of like, yeah, sure, let's do it. I'll go along. Which I've been in that boat before. It's like, hey, Brian, so-and-so company and all of us, we're all going to go here. And it's like, all right, but I'm not in charge. I'm just kind of like...
Along for the ride.
I don't do that anymore. After being on a few of those, I'm like, I'm done. I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
I do ones that I'm in full control of.
Yeah, and if I do go, it's like I'm going to drive my own car.
Right.
I'm not.
I do the same thing. Like,
Sure, I'll come hang out. I'm driving.
and there's something about, being in charge of your expedition from start to finish, knowing where you're going, where you're leaving. And I also like the freedom of not having a committee to tell me what we can and can't do, or what people
Can't
want
go
to
over
do.
there.
Can't climb that hill. You can't go after that.
We're
critter.
gonna go. We're gonna leave 2 hours early. Go get some dinner. Come on, let's go.
Yeah, I'm just done. Like that impedes my adventure, my drive, all that. So I would say that, when you ask guys that kill, that are successful every fall on their elk, mule deer type hunts, we had Kip Fowler on maybe last year, archer killing fool here in Utah, and he hunts like the front. Like he hunts Utah like right up from the valley, and he kills big deer, and he hunts other parts of the world.
Big everything.
With
lots of competition.
And when I was hanging out with Kip and talking to him, him like everyone else I've ever talked to that's successful, there's so much planning that goes into.
He's on a mountain goat hunt right now, or the season starts soon.
Yeah.
He's already picked out 2 billies.
Yeah, and not everyone can do that because of work
family
and how much vacation time you have, and
Yeah.
But whenever it's possible, I think it leads to a lot. It leads to success. Now, that's not to say that you can't just pick a point on a map and go, "That we're going there, and we're going to figure it out." Because I've done a lot of that too. And as long as you're going remote where no one ever goes, odds are you're going to find something cool out there too. That, in a sense, that is some type of planning, but because it's not like you just picked a state randomly and a spot on the map. You intelligently thought about that. You just didn't go into the details of that area. But we're going to find out later how they pay the price, especially on boats. You have an 8-pound, 100-pound metal boat. How's that going to treat you when they actually do the expedition they go on? Things get dicey, but I hope that's interesting. Did you, you're following along. It's kind of a.
I'm ready to hit the river. Let's go.
Yeah, things get wild, but unfortunately, you got to have full context so that when you get to the next parts, you know what the heck's going on. So that's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. And like we said, if you like what we're doing, let us know. Leave us a comment. That's helpful. Like our video and use the codes on our site. Go to briancall.com. Get a t-shirt, hat. We appreciate that. And that's it. Thanks for tuning in. Stay gritty.